Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We'll be learning today Mirtz Hashem part of Daf Kuf Mem Ches Amud Aleph as well as Kuf Mem Ches Amud Beis, which should bring us back onto the Dirshu schedule. So we're holding in Siman Tov Kuf Chavav. We begin today on Daf Kuf Mem Ches Amud Aleph, one line down with Sif Yud Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Ein Kairin al Hames. We don't rice kriya. We don't tear kriya. Kriya al Hames is when we tear our garment in mourning over the mace. That's something the close relatives do, or in the case of a Rebbe, a Talmud Muvik would rice kriya on the loss of a Rebbe Muvik. So Ein Kairin al Hames. We don't rice kriya for a mace. Afilu b'Yom Tov Sheni, even if we're talking about somebody who is niftar on Yom Tov Sheni, which we have seen is more kuladik, it's more lenient than Yom Tov Rishon, but even on Yom Tov Sheni, relatives do not rice kriya, afilu krayvav, even close relatives. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Mishnah Berurah is nun, ein kairin, we don't rice kriya. Why not? The ein zamid tzarchei hameis, because the tearing of kriya is not considered tzarchei hameis. That's not something that we're doing for the needs of the mace. It's not like kfura or the preparation of tachrichin or anything else. It's a symbol of mourning, but that's not tzarchei hameis. Therefore, we don't do it on Yom Tov. Umiu la'erev tzrichin l'kraya. However, of course, after Yom Tov, in the evening when Yom Tov is already over, the avelim will have to rice kriya. Says the Mechaber Sif Yud Beis. Kishameis beleil Yom Tov Sheni. Let's say somebody nebach le'aleinu, somebody is niftar on the night going into Yom Tov Sheni. So it's Motzei Yom Tov Rishon, and we're going into Yom Tov Sheni. Somebody is niftar. When do you do the kvura? Now we saw already earlier that according to the Mechaber, the kvura and all of the needs of the kvura, including preparing the tachrichin, etc. According to the Mechaber, even a yid is allowed to do all of the tzarchei hameis, all of the tzarchei kvura on Yom Tov Sheni. And over here we're addressing Yom Tov Sheni. So the Mechaber says, Kishameis belel Yom Tov Sheni, if somebody is niftar on the night of Yom Tov Sheni, mashkimin, we wake up early the next morning, the morning of Yom Tov Sheni, v'kaivrin oisai kaidem tefillah, and you should do the kvura before davening. Now the reason for this is, we know that right after somebody is niftar, before the kvura is done, the close relatives of the mace, the people that the kvura is mutal olav, the people who have the responsibility to bring the mace to kvura, they are now called eininim. That's the first stage of mourning, is an einain. An einain is a relative who the responsibility of the kvura rests upon him. An einain is potter in mitzvahs. He's exempt from performing most mitzvahs because he has to be totally focused on the needs of the mace and on the tzarchei kvura. Now, we don't want to be mamshich the zman of aninus. We don't want to keep the time of aninus going any longer than it has to. Therefore, we want to do this kvura as soon as possible. So the mace died at night, at the beginning of Yom Tov Sheni. When do you do the kvura? You do the kvura early the next morning before davening. Let's get the kvura done and let's get the aninus over with. However, Kishameis b'yoim, if the niftar died during the day on Yom Tov Sheni, then the Mechaber says, Kaivran oisai achar ha'achila. Now you should do the kvura after the achila, after the time, after the Yom Tov Suda. And what's the reason? Let's see, 1 second. This is Kishameis b'yoim. This is the day of Yom Tov Sheni. If it's the day of Yom Tov Sheni, if the mace was niftar on the day of Yom Tov Sheni, so now it's already too late. You can't get up early and do the kvura before davening. Let's say the niftar died at 8:30 in the morning. So now it's too late already. You missed the chance to get up early and do the kvura. Now, what should you do? You don't want to do the kvura now because you're afraid that if you try to do the kvura now, you're going to miss the zmanei hatefillah. You're going to miss Zman Kriya Shema, you're going to miss Zman Tefillah, you might even miss Chatzos, and you might not get a Yom Tov Suda in before Chatzos, which would be a big chesaron in Simchas Yom Tov. Therefore, what you do is, if the niftar died by the day, so then you daven, you have the Yom Tov Suda, and you do the Kvura after the Suda. Now let's see some details in this. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cotton on aleph, Kishameis beleil Yom Tov Sheni. If the niftar died the night going into the second day of Yom Tov, So then the Mechaber said the halacha is you wake up early the next morning, you do the kfura early the next morning. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ubi Yom Tov Rishon, if a niftar died on the first day of Yom Tov, on Yom Tov Rishon, Shehu al Yedei Amamin, Yom Tov Rishon, even the Mechaber holds, the kfura is done by Einam Yehudim, it's done by non-Jews. He holds that a Yid is not allowed to do kfura or anything on Yom Tov Rishon. So then, if the kfura is being done on Yom Tov Rishon by non-Jews, then afilu meis balayla, even if the niftar died the first night of Yom Tov, the first night, the night going into Yom Tov Rishon. So if it's the night going into Yom Tov Sheni, then we said wake up early and do the kfura before davening. If it's the night going into Yom Tov Rishon, so then, since we're dealing with Yom Tov Rishon, and the kfura is going to be done by non-Jews, then says the Mishnah Berurah, Kaivrin achar ha'achila ay achar ha'tfila. You do the kfura after the Suda, or at least after davening. And the reason for this is, since the kfura is being done by non-Jews, we're afraid that the non-Jews don't have the same urgency that we do. They don't have the same zrizas. You know, it's like a Hatzalah call. When you see a Hatzalah call, so the Yidden of Hatzalah, they come with tremendous urgency and tremendous zrizas. You call 911 and you have the standard issue response, and somehow you don't see the same zrizas, the same sense of urgency. So too over here, what we're concerned with is, on Yom Tov Rishon, when the kfura is being done by non-Jews, how fast are they going to move? And again, we're afraid that if we leave it up to them, we're going to miss the Zman Kriya Shema, we're going to miss the Zman Tefillah. Therefore, on Yom Tov Rishon, we'll always do the kfura after davening and after the Suda. On Yom Tov Sheni, when the kfura, according to the Mechaber, could be done by Yidden, then we could say, wake up early, and then the Yidden will do the kfura, and they'll do it with zrizus. So they'll make the Zmani Kriya Shema and Zmani Tefillah, and they'll make chatzos and have a Suda before chatzos. Now continues the Mishnah Berurah here, nice cut on Aleph. Everything that we're saying here is la Mechaber. According to the sheet of the Mechaber, the Yom Tov Sheni hu al Yedei Yisrael, who holds that on Yom Tov Sheni the kfura is done by Yidden, because he holds that the tzarchei hameis and the tzarchei kfura are allowed to be done by Yidden on Yom Tov Sheni. Amnon lidi done, but according to us, who the Ramah said earlier in the Siman, where we do kfura even on Yom Tov Sheni by employing non-Jews. So then, Yom Tov Rishon v'Sheni Shavin. So then, according to our meaning, there is no nafkamina between Yom Tov Rishon and Yom Tov Sheni. In both cases, the kfura is being done al Yedei Amamin. It's being done through Einam Yehudim, and therefore we have to be afraid that they're not going to be zaris. And since we have to be afraid they're not going to be zaris, we have to do the kfura after davening and after the Suda to make sure that we don't miss out Zman Kriya Shema, Zman Tefillah, and the Sudas Yom Tov. Ois Cotton Nun Beis. And the Mechaber said that if the niftar dies on the second day of Yom Tov, so then you're going to do the kfura achar ha'achila, after the Suda. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'yesha kasvu, there are those that write, demutav l'kavroi b'shah she'omrim piyutim, that we should strike a little bit of a balance over here. You see, the problem with making the kfura early, the problem with making the kfura after the Suda is the Mishnah Berurah himself is going to bring down soon a medrash that darshans the pasuk lo seichlu al hadam, do not eat al hadam, over blood. What does that mean? If you have a mace and the mace is awaiting kfura, lo seichlu al hadam, we don't make a sudas kfa before we do a kfura. We don't let a mace sit. So over here, to do the kfura before davening, so then the problem that we had to do the kfura before davening, we're talking about the mace already was niftar on Yom Tov Sheni. So we don't necessarily have enough time to do the kfura before davening. We're afraid you're going to miss Zman Kriya Shema, and you're going to miss Zman Tefillah, and you're going to lose out on the Yom Tov Suda. So therefore, the Mechaber said, push the kfura after you eat, after the Suda. But there's this problem of lo yisaychlu al adam. What do you do with the medrash that says you can't eat a sudas kva before the kvura? So over here, what the Mishnah Berurah is bringing down, and he's bringing this down from the Marshal, the Magen Avram, and others, he says, v'yesha kasvu, there are those that write that you should strike a balance. We know that in many kehillas they say yotzris on Yom Tov, and that's in the Chazaras Hashatz of Shachris. So he's saying, you know what? Go ahead, daven. You're going to say Kriya Shema B'zman. You're going to daven Shema Esrei, so you're going to make Zman Tefillah. Now, during the Chazaras Hashatz, when the tzibur is saying the piyutim of the yotzris, take out 10 people, go ahead and do the kvura. So now you didn't have to worry about Zman Kriya Shema, you didn't have to worry about Zman Tefillah, you don't have to worry about Lo Yisaychlu Al Adam, because you'll make the kvura right now during Chazaras Hashatz, and then right away after davening, you'll go and you'll have your Suda before Chatzos. That's what some Achrayim say. V'yazminu asara b'nei adam al kol panim l'kvurasai. Pull a minyan out of the shul to make sure you have a minyan by the kvura. V'imu adam chashiv, if the person that you're making the kvura for is an adam chashiv, shechayavim kulam l'lavaisai, so that there's a mitzvah, there's a chiyuv, an obligation upon everybody to join in the lavaya, then what should you do? Yoitzi'u la'acharat tefillah, take the mace out right after davening. So again, you made Zman Kriya Shema, you made Zman Tefillah B'zmanoi. V'yalavu ad Beis HaKvaros, and make a levaya until the Beis HaChaim. Bring the mace to the Beis HaChaim, to the cemetery. V'yanichu sham, and leave him over there in the Beis HaKvaros, I'm sure with a shomer, and with proper respect, with proper dignity. V'yelchu lechel, go eat the Suda. V'achar kach yikperuhu, and then finish out making the kvura. And by doing that eitzah, what you've accomplished is, you had Zman Kriya Shema, you had Zman Tefillah, you started being oisik in the kvura because you already did the levaya and you already brought the mace to the kever in the Beis HaChaim. So there's not such a chesaron anymore in the medrash of lo yisaychlu al adam, because you didn't just go ahead and eat a sudas kva before you were oisik in the kvura. You already began being oisik in the kvura. You didn't finish the kvura, but you already began being oisik in the kvura. So some achrayim say that that's a good eitzah. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, em hakol muchan, if everything necessary for the kvura is already prepared, dahainu hakever, the kever is already dug, v'hatachrichin, and the mace already has the tachrichin, the burial shrouds, ve'efshel kavrei kaidam achila, and you have the ability to make the kvura before the Sudas Yom Tov, be'inyan shelo yemanu al yedei zeh simchas Yom Tov, so that you're not going to lose out on simchas Yom Tov. You have plenty of time for your Yom Tov Suda. It is better to do the full kvura before the achila. The Medrash samchu al kra, because like we said, the Medrash relies on the pasuk in Vayikra that says the lo yisaychlu al adam she'aser lechol suda kavua kaidem shenik barameis, where we learn out that it is prohibited to sit down and eat a sudas kva when there's a mace that's awaiting kvura. Okay. Now we go to a new siman, a very exciting siman. Siman Tav Chav Zayin Dine eiruv tavshilin, the halachas that are involved with the eiruv tavshilin. Uboy Chaf Dalit Seifim, and this is a lengthy siman. We have over here 24 seifim, and if I'm not mistaken, no. This siman is not going to carry us through the end of Chelik Hey. We're going to have two more short simanim before we finish siman Hey, but we are swiftly approaching the end of Chelik Hey. Wow, it's unbelievable. It's hard to imagine. We're already nearing. I remember when we started Chelik Hey. When we did Chelik Dalet didn't look like such a lengthy Chelik. But this Chelik over here, Chelik Hey, was a very lengthy Chelik. And we're almost at the end of Chelik Hey. Baruch Hashem, we should all get there in good health and besimcha. Okay, Siman Tavkav Chav Zayin Dini Eiruv Tavshilu D'Boy Chav Dalet Seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. Yom Tov Shechal Lihiyos Be'erev Shabbos. If Yom Tov falls out on Friday, Erev Shabbos is a Yom Tov day. And we're going to see that this halacha applies both whether Friday is the first day of Yom Tov or Friday is the second day of Yom Tov. Yom Tov shechal liyos be'erev Shabbos. If Friday is Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbos. Lo yevashel b'tchila l'tzarech Shabbos. You may not cook initially for the purposes of Shabbos. Now, we should be very careful over here not to make a mistake with how we explain the word betchila. We're used to the word betchila carrying the connotation of lichatchila as opposed to b'di'evid. That's not what batchila means over here. Over here, when the Mechaber says betchila, what he means is you should not cook where you're cooking for Shabbos. As opposed to what the Mechaber is going to discuss very shortly, if you cook really for Yom Tov, and the leftovers are going to be for Shabbos. What the Mechaber is saying over here is, Yom Tov shechal liyos b'erev Shabbos, if Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbos, lo yevashel b'tchila l'tzarei Shabbos. You should not go to initially cook on Yom Tov for the needs of Shabbos, b'kteira b'fnei atzma, with its own separate pot. You cannot, if Yom Tov is Erev Shabbos, you can't go on Yom Tov afternoon and say, okay, give me my soup pot, I got to put up the soup for Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. And of course, we're talking right now over here in the absence of an eiruv tavshilin. This is the Mechaber is introducing the need for the eiruv tavshilin. Without an eiruv tavshilin, you may not go ahead and take a pot on Yom Tov Erev Shabbos and say, okay, let's go cook for Shabbos and put up a soup for Shabbos. Avol, however, what you are allowed to do, mevashilhu, you may cook kama kederois l'Yom Tov, many pots of food for Yom Tov. You want to put up a soup, and you want to put up a roast, and you want to put up a stew, and you want to put up mashed potatoes, and you want to put up a kugel. You could put up a lot of food for Yom Tov. V'im hoiser, and if there's leftovers, hoiser l'Shabbos. You could eat those leftovers on Shabbos. That is no problem. Now, val yedei eiruv, and if you make an eiruv tavshilin, then mevashel b'tchila l'Shabbos. Then, based on your eiruv tavshilin, you could cook even initially for Shabbos. You could go take your soup pot and say, I'm putting up a soup for Shabbos. Okay, let's stop over here for the moment. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and aleph. Yom Tov shechal liyos b'erev Shabbos. We're addressing a case where Friday is Yom Tov. Yom Tov fell out on Erev Shabbos. And like I said, ve'ein nafkamina ben Yom Tov Rishon ben Yom Tov Sheni shel Goliath. It doesn't matter which day of Yom Tov it is. Whether Friday is the first day Yom Tov or Friday is the second day Yom Tov, the halacha is the same. Demchal Yom Tov Sheni be'erev Shabbos. If the second day of Yom Tov falls out on Friday on Erev Shabbos, gam kein asa lavashel Shabbos. You're still not allowed to cook even on Yom Tov Sheni for Shabbos, im lo yal yedei eiruv, unless you have an eiruv, unless you employ the heter of an eiruv tavshilin, she'yarev me eiruv Yom Tov Harishon, where you make this eiruv tavshilin on eiruv Yom Tov Rishon, on eiruv Yom Tov, the day before Yom Tov. Ois cotton bays, the Mechaber said, you're not allowed to cook initially for Shabbos. You're not allowed to go put up a pot of soup specifically for Shabbos purposes. That you're not allowed to do. But the Mechaber said, absent an eiruv tavshila, what may you do? Kama kederes liyom tov im hoiser. You're allowed to put up many different pots of food for Yom Tov, and if you have extra, if you have leftovers, you can eat it on Shabbos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, va'afilu nitaisar kederes shleima kula. Even if there's an entire pot that you didn't touch at all for Yom Tov, you put up a whole stew for Yom Tov and you never touched it. The whole pot of stew is extra. You could eat it on Yom Tov. Kevin shemitchila chashav sheyitztarich liyom Tov. Since when you put the stew up, your thought process was that you were going to do it for Yom Tov, it was mutter. However, ubelvad shelo yarim bazeh. You cannot use ha'aroma. You can't use some kind of a halachic trickery over here and say, yeah, I'm doing it for Yom Tov, and then not touch it, and then use it for Shabbos. That you can't do. The chamavur b'sif chav daled ayin sham, like we're going to see later on at the end of the Siman in sif chav daled, v'ayin b'sif chav gimel, or b'simin tav kov gimel. He sends us to sif chav gimel and to simin tav kov gimel, and we'll explain these things a little bit further on. Now, Sif Cotton Gimel, Ice Cotton Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah says, Val Yidei Eiruv Mevashel B'Tchila. The Mechaber said, if you employ an eiruv tavshilin, then you could cook even initially. You could set out to do your cooking in a complete separate pot with no intent at all of using this food for Yom Tov. You could go ahead and cook specifically for Shabbos if you use an eiruv tavshilin. Now, before we read the Mishnah Berurah over here, just happens to be a very interesting machlokes rishonim on the eiruv tavshilin. Exactly what is an eiruv tavshilin? What does it mean, eiruv tavshilin? Now, we're used to the word eiruv Many of us are used to the word eiruv. That's how we always refer to the eiruv that surrounds our communities, where we have the lechis and the strings. We call it an eiruv. Now that's really a misnomer. That is not an eiruv. What that is it's a tzuras ha-pesach. When we put up lechis with a string on top, we're making a tzuras ha-pesach. We're making the form of a doorway, which is a halachically acceptable mechitza. And by surrounding our community with lechis and strings, making multiple tzuras ha-pesachs, surrounding our entire community, what we're doing is we're enclosing the community and making it kind of one big chutzner. And then, of course, we need to make it a eiruv chatzeros. We have to take all of the separate rishos hayachids that are in this now big chutzner, and we have to join them in an eiruv chatzeros. Now, why is an eiruv chatzeros called an eiruv chatzeros? So let's go back to the heady days of Chelik Daled, when we were learning all of the halachas of eiruv chatzeros, and remind ourselves how an eiruv chatzeros works. In the very basic case of an eiruv chatzeros, you have a chotzer. A chotzer is a large parcel of property, and it's surrounded by a mechitza. So technically speaking, the entire interior of that chotzer is a rishos hayachid, and you're allowed to carry in a rishos hayachid on Shabbos. Not only are you allowed to carry in a rishos hayachid on Shabbos, but let's say in this chotzer there are 10 houses that belong to 10 different parties. There are 10 houses that belong to 10 different owners. Midoraisa, you would be allowed to carry from every one of those houses into the chotzer, and from the chotzer into any one of those 10 houses. Why? Because the chotzer is a rishos hayachid, and the houses are each a rishos hayachid. So midoraisa, we have no problem here of hoitzah, but we have a derabanan dika problem of hoitzah. What's the derabanan dika problem? The Chazal were afraid that this chotzer, which is being shared by 10 different houses, so you have 10 individual rishos hayachids. Each one is owned by a singular party, and they commonly use a common chotzer. So the chotzer feels, looks, and smells, and tastes like a rishos harabim in comparison to the houses. Each house is serving a single entity. It's serving a single owner. So that's a real bona fide rishos hayachid. When you come out of the house and you carry something from the house into this common chotzer, what you're doing is you're transferring an object from a singular rishos hayachid out into a common property. That feels like you're moving something from a rishos hayachid to a rishos harabim. The Chazal were afraid, if we're going to allow you to do that on Shabbos, you may come to transfer an object from a bona fide rishos hayachid to a bona fide daraisa rishos harabim. So they said you're not allowed to do this unless you join the chotzer in an eiruv chatzeros. What's an eiruv chatzeros? You take pas, you take bread, enough for a suda, or depending on how many people in the chotzer, that depends how big the eiruv has to be, and you put it, everybody has a chelik in that pas, and everybody has a portion in that pas. You take that pas, you put it in one of the houses. Oh, you know what happens now? Now all of the people who live in the chotzer become joined as one unit in that house. And now the chotzer is serving that unit. So we no longer look at the chotzer as being a common property shared by a lot of singular entities. We now look at it as an entity, a chotzer, that's serving one combined unit of all the families, all the houses that live in the chotzer. That's why it's called an eiruv chatzeros, because the word eiruv means to blend. It means to mix and to combine. What we're doing is we're taking all the individual owners of all the individual houses in the chotzer and we're combining them. That's why it's called an eiruv chatzeros. What does that have to do with eiruv tavshilin? Why do we call this instrument that allows us to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos, why is it called an eiruv? Why is it called a eiruv tavshilin? So here we have a machlekes, the Rambam and the Ravid, at least according to the way most achrayim seem to understand the Rambam. The Rambam seems to say that the reason it's called an eiruv tavshilin is only because we are borrowing the term eiruv from eiruv chatzeros. And eiruv chatzeros is an instrument that is a matir, an issa d'Rabbanan. We have an issa d'Rabbanan to carry from a bayis to the chotzer. How are we matir that issa d'Rabbanan? The Chazal created an instrument of eiruv chatzeros. So the eiruv is an instrument that is matir in Issa D'Rabbanan. So too here by eiruv tavshilin. The Isser of cooking on Shabbos the Isser of cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos is an Issa D'Rabbanan. So we need an instrument to be matir that Issa D'Rabbanan. The Chazal gave us an instrument of an eiruv tavshilin. And since it's an instrument that's matir and Issa D'Rabbanan, we call it an eiruv. So it has nothing to do with the meaning of the word eiruv. It's just a borrowed technical term. We're using the term eiruv as an instrument that's matir and Issa D'Rabbanan. That's the way the Rambam seems to understand the nomenclature of eiruv tavshilin. The Ravid, however, disagrees with the Rambam, and the Ravid says, no, that's not what it means. You know what it means? He says, how does an eiruv tavshilin work? The way an eiruv tavshilin works is, before Yom Tov, on erev Yom Tov, we prepare something for Shabbos. We take the matzah, we take the egg, we make it an eiruv. What does that mean? What are we doing? What we're doing is, we're taking a cooked dish, we're taking an egg that we cooked, and we're taking a baked matzah, and that is the beginning of our preparation for Shabbos. Once we started preparing on Shabbos, now when Yom Tov comes, we could continue, we could prepare for Yom Tov, we could prepare for Shabbos, and everything becomes combined. And even our preparation that we do for Shabbos, it's also combined with the cooking that we did on erev Yom Tov for Shabbos. So eiruv tavshilin is a blending of the cooking. That's why we use the term eiruv according to the Ravid. So we have a very interesting machlokes rishonim over here of exactly what does this mean. Eiruv tavshilin. Okay. Incidentally, even the idea that the cooking for on Yom Tov for Shabbos, exactly what is that? Is that an Issa D'Rabbanan or is that an Issa D'Oraisa? That happens to be a machlokes Amoraim. According to Rav Chisda, cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos is only an Issa D'Rabbanan. It's Bechlal. There's no shaychus to an Issa D'Oraisa. According to Rabbah, it really would be an Issa D'Oraisa. The only reason it's not an Issa D'Oraisa is because of the concept of hoyel. The Rabbah, right? I think I got that right. Let me just give that a quick check. I believe what I'm saying is true. Yeah. According to Rabbah, we don't say hoyel. We don't say hoyel since it's mutter to cook l'tzarech Yom Tov. It's also mutter to cook not l'tzarech Yom Tov. So according to Rabbah, really it should be a Isser D'Oraisa. Really it should be an Isser D'Oraisa. Now, according to Rabbah, we do say hoyel. That's what it is. According to Rabbah, we say hoyel. That's why it's mutter. According to Rav Chisda, we don't need hoyel. Right. According to Rav Chisda, we don't need hoyel. It wouldn't be an Issa D'Oraisa anyway. But l'chal pachas, I don't want to confuse anybody. The bottom line is, both according to Rav Chisda and according to Rabbah, it's only an Issa D'Rabbanan, and that's why an eiruv tavshilin helps. Okay. Now, with that kind of prelude, let's go now to the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Gimel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you would employ an eiruv tavshilin, now you could even initially set out to go ahead and cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasva Paiskin, the Paiskim right. The heter ha'eiruv hu aflaman da amar the malachai Shabbos ein nasin b'Yom Tov midaraisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah that the eiruv tavshilin is efficacious, it works, and it's matir preparation, cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos, even according to Rabbah, even according to the Shita that holds that doing malacha on Yom Tov for Shabbos purposes would really be an Issa Midaraisa. Still, an eiruv tavshilin works. Why? Because over here it still would only be an Issa D'Rabbanan. In other words, again, even according to Rabbah, who holds that generally speaking, to do malacha on Yom Tov for either a weekday or for Shabbos would usually be an Issa D'Oraisa, and an eruv tavshilin can't be matter in issa daraisa, still over here an eruv tavshilin will be effective to allow you to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Why? This explains the Mishnah Berurah that we call makam ein kan ela issa medivrei seifrim, because over here there still would only be an issa derabanan. Why? The midaraisa amrinan hayol ve'ilu mekalei archim the chazil Yom Tov gufa, because a rabbi who's the one who says that normally doing malacha on Yom Tov for Chayil or for Shabbos is an Issa Daraisa, Rabba also holds that you say Hayil, that you say, since I would be allowed to do extra cooking on Yom Tov itself, because maybe guests will show up and I'll need extra food. So according to Rabba, since you say Hayil for Midaraisa, in Kain Ein Oisi Isser Bazev Rak Midarabanan Asru. So then the cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos is only an Isser Darabanan. It's not an Isser Daraisa, because Midaraisa you can employ Hayil. And you could say, if I'm putting up a soup now, it's okay, maybe guests will show up and I'll serve them the soup. Shabbos, since it's only really an Issa D'Rabbanan, because you could say Hayil, to take care of the Issa D'Rabbanan, we made an eiruv tavshilin to allow you to prepare for Shabbos, because that's a Shasat Chak. You need to be able to prepare for Shabbos. How does the eiruv tavshilin work? Like I explained, because we say that it's as if you already started to do your Shabbos preparations on erev Yom Tov, and now you're just finishing your preparations. That's okay. You're finishing your preparations on Yom Tov. Like the Ramah is going to explain the mechanics of erev tavshilin. The Kosra Achronim, the Achronim write, to be Yom Tov shechal liyos be'erev Shabbos, that when Yom Tov does fall out on erev Shabbos, Yizar, you should take care lahaktim achanos ma'achalav l'Shabbos. You should make sure that you do your Shabbos preparations early in the day on Yom Tov. So you should finish all of this malacha that you're doing for Shabbos early in the day. Because if you push off making your cholent on Yom Tov for Shabbos all the way until Shkia, so that there's no chance that you're going to need it on Yom Tov. If you make the cholent for Shabbos all the way 10 minutes before Shkia on Erev Shabbos, you can't say Hayil u'miklei archim. You can't employ Hayil and say I'm allowed to make this cholent because maybe I'm going to serve it to guests who are going to show up. No guests are showing up anymore. It's not even going to be ready. So then halo yesh kan l'sad malacha daraisa. Now you're taking the risk of stepping on an issa daraisa, because according to Rabbah, cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos is an issa daraisa if you don't have Hayil. So if you push it late in the day when you don't have Hayil, you're treading on an issa daraisa according to Rabbah. Also, he says here in the brackets, you should take care that when you insulate your hot food for Shabbos, you have to make sure that they're going to be cooked Kameichel ben Drasai still on Yom Tov. The Kosvu and the Paiskim write to be Tam said that for the same reason, Nagu lahaktim tfilas arvis b'leil Shabbos, they had a minig to make eiruv early on Friday night when Friday is Yom Tov. Why? Kishachal samach Yom Tov, kedei shelo yisacher melechas bishul Yom Tov at samach lachashecha. They came up with a cute chap. They said, you know what? We'll make davening early Friday night. That way you have to be finished all your preparations early because you got to go to shul. So now we're not afraid that you're going to be putting up a cholent too late. Vayin bir alacha. The b'shasat chak yesh lahakal b'yom tov sheni shechal be'erev Shabbos. B'shasat chak you could be mekel if the second day of Yom Tov fell on an erev Shabbos. Em nesacher b'shula l'Shabbos atzamach l'Shabbos. If you didn't finish your cooking for Shabbos until very close to Shabbos, you could be mekel. V'af b'yom tov rishon efshad yesh lahakal b'shasat chak. He says it could be that even in Yom Tov rishon b'shasat chak, if you forgot to make your cholent, you could be mekel. But lechatchila you should take care. Ubefrat b'yom tov rishon shahu da araisa. Certainly on Yom Tov Rishon, when we're taking the risk of a daraisa, we should take care to finish the preparation early. We're going to stop over here by the words of the Ramah, 3 lines down. We're basically back onto the Dirshu schedule. We're just a little bit behind, but not much. We're on the page, just I think the Dirshu schedule runs to the end of the Sif, but we'll have no problem tomorrow finishing tomorrow's Dirshu. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should stand God's Klal Yisrael in good stead. Baruch Hashem should send Yeshuas and Refuas to all those in need. We should only hear Simchas. Be well.